I have a little time here, and I thought I would finally finish the second part of my shelf tour for my mass markets. I have a little library cart with all of my mass market books and my small sized editions. So, the first part I did a couple months ago, and I'm finally going to finish that up today. I recently picked up the periodic table by Primo Levi in one of these Penguin Essentials editions, these nice pocket sized with these really nice designs and covers and some good titles. But I think this book has to have the smallest font of any book I own. It's really, really tiny. I don't know if it's coming across on the camera, but Levy was a scientist and a Holocaust survivor who wrote extensively about his experience during the Holocaust. And I think this is a collection of short stories, or they're stories that are sort of based on his life. They're somewhat autobiographical, and they're all named after an element from the periodic table. So the first one here is argon. I'm really curious about this. I've heard that Levy's stuff is really powerful. So, if my eyes are feeling good for a few days, maybe I'll give this one a go. I have Lust Caution by Eileen Chang. Chang is a writer I've seen around. I know some of her books are published by NYRB, so the name has been familiar to me for a while. And I found this one out here. Here's a nice quote here: "Dead, she was his ghost," which is pretty interesting. 5 different translators for 5 different stories. It's probably a really good sample of her stuff, and it might give me some some motivation to try some of her longer novels and look for her stuff when I can find it. I've always wanted to read Joseph Conrad, but I tried to read The Heart of Darkness, and I don't know, just like I wasn't in a great place to really give it a fair shake. I found a copy of Nostromo out here for really cheap, and it's got that really nice old coloring and that kind of sweet chocolatey smell that some used books get. So I think this will be my first Conrad. When I decide I'm ready for his stuff, I will start with Nostromo, which I don't know if it's considered like one of his best books, but I also haven't heard anyone like really denigrate it. So it's probably a safe choice. I have The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. I think Collins, as this sort of like Victorian progenitor of the detective novel, has like a pretty strong reputation. But I think maybe I've heard more people praise The Moonstone than this one. But this is the one I was able to find for cheap out here, and I'd like to give it a try. It's quite long. It's quite long. So we'll see. I mean, I don't know if anyone particularly enjoyed The Woman in White. It would be nice to hear what made it so interesting or compelling. I have a few more books from the Oxford World's Classics pocket-sized editions. I really like these books. I like the design of the spines, and the pages seem to age well too. The books have really held up well over time. I have Anna Karenina by Tolstoy, which I intend to read and I intend to enjoy thoroughly when I get the chance. Translated by Louise and Aylmer Maude. And Tolstoy and the Russians, I think it's a bit tricky with translators and stuff. So who knows how good this edition is, or I'm sure people have strong preferences one way or the other. I have Pascal's Pensées and Other Writings. Bit of philosophy, but I'm not sure how. I'm not so attracted to sort of like religious philosophy in general, but I really like the way this book is set up, and like the different installments, the different entries of thoughts and ideas here. Maybe will make it easier to parse. I have Daisy Miller and Other Stories by Henry James. James, I'm really interested in reading more. He's influenced a lot of my favorite writers, so this collection is small, but I think there's a pretty hefty introduction to it, or preface, and James' scholarship seems to be really, really thorough. There's lots of people who have written about Henry James, so the other stories in here, Pandora, the Patagonia, and 4 Meetings, will certainly be interesting, and I expect some beautiful, beautiful writing. This is The Seducer's Diary by Soren Kierkegaard, which I read last year and I talked about in one of my monthly reading wrap-ups. I really like this book. It reads more like a novel, and it's a good entryway into Kierkegaard's thinking and philosophy, and his thoughts on love and relationships, envy, and stuff like that. I'm really curious to read more Kierkegaard. I have the essential Kierkegaard on my shelf. I got this copy of A Treatise of Human Nature by Hume for I think 100 yen. And I don't know too much about Hume. I know he's an empiricist, and I know that people really praise his writing. They say that reading Hume is really enjoyable. That's what I've heard. For me, philosophy, like learning philosophy, it's just like a constant work in progress, and like I'm inching forward bit by bit into figuring out what things are, and how things are connected. This one, the spine is really stiff, but I really like these margin like indicators that show what passage we're on. So I mean, we'll see. Like, I think I have a shorter work of Hume on the shelf behind me that might be a little bit more accessible, but I'm pretty sure A Treatise of Human Nature is like his first major bit of philosophy. A bit, it's like 650 pages. So it should be interesting too. I have How Fiction Works by James Wood. I mean, speaking of guys who love Henry James, there's a lot of James appreciation going on here. Wood does a lot to break what makes writing good. He breaks it down on like a word by word basis, and like the choice of adverbs and the choice of adjectives, and I really enjoyed this one. This is the book that inspired me to read Buddenbrooks, I think, which became one of my favorite books. So I think Wood is like a pretty legit critic, and he's done a lot of writing about literature. So this is a really great volume. I mean, anyone who really likes reading, this is really something that I can't imagine anybody not appreciating. Here's my copy of Man and His Symbols by Jung, which I've talked about. I really like Jung, and I want to read more of his stuff. This one is going to be really a really extensive like reading project. I'm not sure if I'll have time to get to it this year, but I'd really like to sit down for a couple of weeks and just live with Jung for however long it takes to get through his stuff. The stuff that I have, in any case. I think Jung is so interesting. There's other contributors here as well. So it's this whole like movement of Jungian stuff happening, and all these images, and really like a yantra, a form of mandala composed of 9 linked triangles, like just far out stuff. I've got 2 of these Folger Shakespeare Library mass markets. I've got The Tempest and King Lear. And I got these 2 specifically because they are ones I've never read. I didn't read them in high school or college or anything. So I always thought when I was younger, these were the editions that we read in school, these Folger editions. So in my mind, I thought, well, when it's time for me to collect Shakespeare and I want to have all of them, these were the editions I would want to have. But as I bought these, and as they've been sitting on my shelf, I flipped through them a little bit, and I don't know, the font's a little small, and I don't really like this notes on one page and text on the other. I think I'd prefer like a vertical split or horizontal split. I don't know. I think I'd rather have the text on top and footnotes on the bottom. So I think I want to get like the Pelican Library ones. I've got a bunch here that I keep organized by publisher. They're sort of smaller publishers or publishers I particularly enjoy. So I think I'll talk about them in that order too. I've got 2 from Deep Vellum. I've got Life Went On Anyway by Oleg Sentsov, and 7 Samurai Swept Away in a River by Jung Young Moon. I've read both of these books, and I really like Deep Vellum and what they're doing with works in translation. I found Life Went On Anyway incredibly compelling. Sentsov is a Ukrainian writer, and he writes about his childhood in Ukraine, and these stories are very brief. and they're very succinct, and you know, there isn't a whole lot of decoration to the prose, but it's a really wonderful bit of childhood writing. It reminded me in tone, it reminded me a lot of Agatha Christoph, that sort of uh, Eastern European, you know, communist era childhood, kind of bleak, but you know, they're kids, so they make the most out of it anyway. That tone, that atmosphere, is one of my favorites. I really enjoy stuff like that. Seven Samurai Swept Away in a River, I wish I enjoyed more. I think it had a lot of really cool ideas, but I found a lot of the like, there's a lot of like wishy-washiness in here. Somewhere on in this page, I wrote a book, or I wrote a note complaining like ugh, or just like a question mark. Like I was like, I couldn't remember how this cat had come to make an appearance in my mind, but for some time I gave the cat a lot of thought, as if the cat were something that was with me. And although I didn't know what the seven samurai who came to make an appearance in my mind after that had to do with the cat, it was all right if they didn't have anything to do with the cat. Um, and, you know, at the time, I remember being frustrated by that. I remember being frustrated. There's a lot of that sort of stuff like, well, you know, what does any of it mean? I'd like to read it again. I mean, we'll see. That might be the sort of thing that changes as I change, and the book will grow as I grow. Maybe I'm a different reader now. I hope I'm a different reader now. Next, I have a bunch of books by Sublunary Editions. I placed a big order with them a couple of years ago, and I've been hoping to get to their stuff sooner rather than later. I have two by Pierre Sange. I have Rabelais's Donuts and Studies of Silhouettes. Sanges is a French writer, and these are both translated by Jacob Seifring. Both of these are collections of short writings, essays and stories, shorter pieces, and things like that. So I'm curious to see what he's all about. I was happy to get both of these. I got the next four solely, well, not solely. I got the next four in large part because they were all translated by the same person. Fragments from a Found Notebook by Mihail Sebastian, I talked about recently. I read this one, I think in March. Transparent Body, poems by Max Blecher, and The Lighted Burrow, a sanatorium journal. And Homecoming by Magda Isanos. All of these are translated by Christina Tudor-Sideri, who I really admire. I read her book Under the Sign of the Labyrinth, which is also from Sublunary Editions, and this book really blew me away, and it might be something I revisit annually or regularly. I really thought it was a special bit of writing that I talked about last year. This is primarily, I think, poetry, and The Lighted Burrow is maybe more of a journal, but, you know, prose, poems, really surreal kind of stuff. And I read Fragments of a Found Notebook, and I enjoyed it a lot, and I really liked Christina Tudor-Sideri's thoughts on Mihail Sebastian in her introduction. And so I'm sure that her taste, you know, her interests in this probably spreads out throughout these books. I'm sure there's some sort of thread connecting them besides their original language. So that will be really interesting to see. And speaking of Christina Tudor-Sideri, I also got this one, If I Had Not Seen Their Sleeping Faces, which is from a different publisher, Eratum Press. And this is like, sort of like a found poetry type thing, or there's a poem, Les Vivants et les Morts by Anna de Noailles. French is tough for me. Lines from this bit of writing are used as sort of jumping off points for Tudor-Sideri in this piece. So all of the bold text at the beginning is sort of an extract, and she takes it from there into a longer passage. So I'm curious to read this one too. I have a bunch of books from New Directions. This is The Life of Tufu by Elliot Weinberger, which I talked about recently. I read this one in April, I believe. I really enjoyed this one, and I'd like to read more from Weinberger and Tufu, for that matter. This is Fresno Stories by William Saroyan. I just read The Human Comedy a couple of months ago, and I really liked it. I think Saroyan's got a really interesting perspective on the American experience, and his California that he writes about in The Human Comedy is really compelling and very sweet. I'm hoping for something similar in these stories here. This is Now Now Louison by Jean Fremont. I got this book for two reasons. Um, I was at a Barnes& and Noble in Rochester, and they had a used section, and that was the first time I'd ever seen that in my life. I have no idea if it's like a local thing, or if like a few of them have used sections now that have been in Japan. They've just been popping up over the last couple of years, but I couldn't believe that. So that was really cool. And this book was only like $4. And the translator, where's the translator? Cole Swenson is a poet who I don't know anything about, but somehow the name came across my feed, or like I was searching something and it came up. So I had heard of Cole Swenson, and I saw this one from New Directions used at the Barnes& and Noble. It just seemed like something meant to be. And I like these sort of fragmentary writing styles, you know, so it could be interesting. I'm not really too sure what this one is about. I don't really know what to expect. I have two books by Agatha Christoph. I have I Don't Care, which are early stories, and I have The Illiterate, which is like a memoir type thing. But both of these are very brief. You could read both of them in a day if you'd like. I mean, they're 50 or 60 pages. Agatha Christoph is one of my favorite writers. Everything of hers that I've read, I have really loved, you know. Her main novels, you can get the collection, I think, The Notebook, The Proof, and The Third Lie, I believe they're called. Those stories are wonderful. And for some reason, those ones were translated extensively into Japanese. You can get those books in like really nice hardcover editions at almost any used bookstore in Japan. They've got them everywhere. And so that's interesting to see. And I really like Christoph. I like the world that she creates, even though that sucks to say, because it's very clear she had a hard time, you know, being an immigrant from Hungary, moving to France and learning French, and eventually, you know, writing in French and being published in French. Something about her life and her story, she's able to put directly her experience onto the page in a way that's very, very compelling. I really, really like Agatha Christoph, and of these two, maybe The Illiterate is the stronger. Really great. I have The Life Around Us by Denise Levertov. Levertov is a poet who has, I think, dozens of volumes, and I can't remember why, but this is the one that ended up being on my Goodreads. I knew I wanted to read Levertov, and I knew specifically I wanted to read this edition, this book. But it's been so long I can't remember why, and I don't read poetry so frequently, but this seems like something I would really enjoy. And it might give me, you know, as I said, she has a lot of books, so it might really be great for me to have a poet I could deeply connect with. These are poems on nature. Lastly, I have Stranger to the Moon by Evelio Rosero. I got this one, I think there was a bookstore in Pittsburgh that I liked, and I was leaving the city and I wanted to get something as sort of a memento of my like last weekend in Pittsburgh. So I got this one without knowing too much about it. Yeah, Rosero is a Colombian writer. So I really trust New Directions in general, but I think their selection of South American writers is really excellent. So, you know, this will be something else I can get to in, you know, a day or so, and hopefully really enjoy. Stranger to the Moon. I have two of the Wolfgang Hilbig books from Eratum Press. I've got The Tiding of the Trees and Old Rendering Plant. I read Old Rendering Plant, and I didn't give it the time it deserved. I sort of like, I really, I think I underestimated it because it's quite small and the font is quite, you know, there's lots of space in the margins. So, you know, something in my mind sort of like shifts gears when I see that, and I imagine that because of that, I didn't necessarily pay as much attention to this one as I would have, as I should have. So this one deserves a revisit, and The Tiding of the Trees also deserves a lot of attention when I get to it. These books are talked up all over the place. The people who like these books, I really respect. Blurbs from Laszlo Krasnohorkai, and I saw here Joshua Cohen. So These come highly recommended from a lot of really great and interesting writers. This is the complete poetry of Joan Murray, uh, who I don't know anything about. There's a preface from John Ashbery, who I do know about, and these NYRB Poets books are quite nice and well designed, and I trust their selections. I got this book just because it was on sale, and stuff like this doesn't come across my, I don't get to find stuff like this from the publishers I really like. That seems really interesting as often as I'd like. So I really take a lot of, I take the opportunity to buy stuff like this whenever I can. So this is Joan Murray's poems. Hopefully I can find something to like in here. This is The Bell on Deck by Matt Booker, which I read last year and I talked about. I really, really loved this one. It's an homage to David Markson, and I believe Booker has a new book out, maybe in the last couple of weeks or so, which is a similar style, a similar homage to Markson, who, David Markson, ask me any given day, I might tell you that David Markson is my favorite writer. So anything like that really does it for me. And this book was really great. I think the new one, I can't remember the name, but I think it's the same publisher, this Sideshow Media Group. I'll finish up with a bunch of my Japanese literature stuff. I have 2 books from Banana Yoshimoto. I have Goodbye Tsugumi and NP. I remember reading Goodbye Tsugumi, and this was the first time I didn't really like a Yoshimoto book that much, but I think it's one of her most popular, so maybe it deserves another chance. NP I really liked, and I think it's kind of a continuation of what she is trying to do in The Premonition, which I read and I really didn't like that much. It seems like she figured out what she was trying to say and explored it maybe further and in a better way in this one. So NP is a really good one if you can find it. I have Hiroshima Notes by Kenzaburo Oe, which are his nonfiction writings about Hiroshima and related to Hiroshima and nuclear in general. And he writes about like the anti-nuclear movement in Japan, which are still, it's still a very strong movement. And if you've spent time in Japan, or even if you visit, you might notice people protesting in the streets. More often than not, they are anti-nuclear protesters. This is like a big movement, and always writing about this, some 60 years ago. So he's got a lot of interesting things to say, and I'm really looking forward to reading this one. I have A Dark Night's Passing by Naoya Shiga, who I really love, or the one book of his I've read, I've really, really loved, which was The Paper Door. And this is a longer novel, so I'm curious to see if his style, if it stays consistent throughout like a 300 or 400 page novel. I got this one, I think, last summer at one of the book fairs here. I have 3 from Yasunari Kawabata. House of the Sleeping Beauties and Other Stories, which I read and talked about recently in my March video, I think. This is Thousand Cranes, which I'm really excited to read because it's so brief. I think it might be like a really nice, comfortable reading experience for me to, put it in my coat pocket and walk around without a bag or anything and just flip through it, 8 or 12 pages at a time on any given day off, And here is one of my copies of Palm of the Hand stories. This is my favorite of Yasunari Kawabata's books. It's either this one or The Sound of the Mountain. And it's one of the only books I have more than one copy of. I really liked the color of this one, so I thought I would get a second copy. And I'm looking for like a really nice hardcover if I can find it. I'd really like a nice copy of this one in the Japanese too. These are really nice short stories, really beautiful stuff. I have Glimpses of Unfamiliar Japan by Lafcadio Hearn. And this is his sort of travel writings or sort of his Japanese cultural studies stuff. He explains a lot of the festivals and symbols and temples and shrines and gardens and tea and stuff like that. It's really extensive, and I mean, Lafcadio Hearn wrote so much about Japan. It's really, really great to have. Like, it's a really great resource, This is one I've been meaning to get to for a long time, and I really love this cover. This is Monkey Brain Sushi New Tastes in Japanese Fiction, which I've talked about before. It's an anthology of sort of newer wave Japanese writers from like the 80s and 90s. So Murakami is in here, and let's see, someone else I know is in here. Masahiko Shimada is in here. Genichiro Takahashi is in here. There's also like a manga in here. So it's going to be like modern, sort of weirdo stuff. Very cool copy, a very cool anthology that I'm happy to have and excited to get to. This is Monkey's Raincoat, Sarumino, linked poetry of the Basho school with haiku selections. This has a lot of information about the writing of haiku and Basho and his school, and then there's an extensive selection of these sort of linked haiku that sort of speak to each other on any given theme. It should be really great. It's got the original Japanese over here, nice illustrations. This one is really, really great, really exciting. What is this? This is the Tuttle one, right? All of the books in this series are really excellent. All of their like sort of first wave, like 70s. When did this one come out? Yeah, this book came out in 1985. So a lot of the Tuttle mass markets from the Japanese around this time are really, really great. So if you can find any of those, I recommend them. This is Sarumino. This is my 3-volume set of the History of Japan by George Sansom, which I've talked about in another video, to 1334, 1334 to 1615, and 1615 to 1867. Of the 3 of these, I think I'm most excited for the first one, this Heian period of Japan. I really, really like. But all of it sort of leading up to the Meiji Restoration and the reopening of Japan. I think that's a sort of perfect set, leading up to everything that sort of changed in the last 150 years or so. I have Shinto, the Kamiway by Sokyo Ono. I got this really nice hardcover edition, which sort of goes into some of the traditional Shinto symbols and artifacts and the meaning behind all of the gates and like stone sculptures and stuff like that. It might, really enlighten me, especially, living in Japan. You see these things every day, and I'm not always totally sure the meaning of any given piece of art or any given engraving or something like that. It should be really cool to read. I have Revenge by Yoko Ogawa, which they're sort of these interconnected stories of revenge. The stories sort of circle around this idea of revenge, and from the first story to the end, characters sort of reappear, or you get the feeling that all of the characters in these stories know each other, and it all comes full circle really nicely. I really like these vintage editions too, which I think I've mentioned before. This series has some really, really good titles, and Yoko Ogawa, I think The Housekeeper and the Professor is also supposed to be really good, and I know a lot of people have read The Memory Police. Lastly, I have Donald Ritchie's A Tractate on Japanese Aesthetics, which is a really nice short introduction to wabi-sabi and Zen and stuff like that. A really great bit of cultural criticism from Stonebridge Press, who I've mentioned before do really, really great stuff for Japanese culture. And Donald Ritchie seems to have just like an endless curiosity for Japan and Japanese culture. And he lived here long enough. He got to know a lot of the celebrities and the artists. So, who better to learn about these sorts of things from than someone who lived it and got to meet these people personally. And that's all I have. That's some of my collection. That's all of the books from my library cart. I wanted to go a little bit faster paced this time, so hopefully a lot of that was clear. And if everyone likes this one, maybe I'll make more shelf tour videos in the future, but I'm really happy I was able to, finish that part, the library cart that's done. I've done it. Thank you for watching.